The night I heard the scissors, I was rinsing coffee grounds from a chipped mug and thinking about payday. The kitchen window rattled in the Chicago wind, and the radiator hissed like an old cat. Ava stood by the table, hair twisted up, face blank as a bank teller. She held my wallet in one hand and a bright pair of scissors in the other. One soft snip, then another. Plastic clicked on the table like little bones. "Why are you doing that?" I asked too calmly, like if I kept my voice smooth I could make the moment behave. "We're going cash only," she said. "You're terrible with plastic. It's for your own good. There are moments you want to rewind, but instead, they dig their heels in." There was the smell of frying onions from the neighbor's place, salt in the radiator air, the way the light from the hallway fell across her wrist, and then my phone buzzed. Deposit posted. Balance suddenly small. It was like watching a glass fill itself and then tip over, all in a blink. "You moved it?" I said, because even in shock your body knows what's happening. "I'm safeguarding our future," she said, and slid my newly useless cards back into the empty wallet like a joke. I stared at her, at the scissors, at the cheap rug under our feet that I had picked out at a thrift store on Western. I thought of the hours that had gone into that paycheck, the calloused hands and the bleach-scented hallway, the early mornings at the hospital delivering linens to floors still dreaming, the kind of work that leaves a hum in your bones long after you sit down. It wasn't the money that burned. It was the certainty that she believed she could do it, and I would take it. I rinsed the mug until the water ran cold. That was the first shock. The second came a few days later, a quiet knock, a white slip jammed under our door, a notice about rent with polite words and an unspoken threat. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes and said she'd handle it. She always said that. In the same voice she used to tell me not to buy cheap coffee or to tuck in my shirt before we went out with her friends. I thought about all the little moments that had led me there. The night we met at an open mic on Milwaukee when she laughed at my dumb joke and I felt my chest lift, lighter than I'd been in a while. The late walk along the lake with damp wind in our faces and the city lighting itself up one building at a time. The first time she handed me her keys and said, "Make yourself at home," and I half believed her. Back then I was the guy who stayed late without being asked. I was the one who could fold a fitted sheet in one smooth motion and carry a stack of pillowcases taller than my head. I sent money to my sister when she needed to fix a radiator in her place in Joliet. I sold my guitar to help cover a repair on Ava's car so she could get to her new job at a boutique she swore would turn into something bigger. We had a routine that felt like a real life. I fried eggs in the morning with a pinch of pepper she brought me from a shop in Pilsen. She curled up on the couch with a magazine and her bare feet pressed against my thigh. She told me we were building something. Then the micro things began. She teased me in front of her friends when I mispronounced the name of her favorite designer, like a kid who showed up with spinach in his teeth. She organized our groceries and taped Post-its to Tupperware that said, "Don't eat now, and if you're hungry, drink water." I came home once to find my work boots at the far end of the hall and a note that said, "Shoes off by the door. You're not tracking the hospital into this place." It wasn't wrong. It was the tone, the smirk at the corner of the note, as if I'd been a naughty dog. She borrowed my hoodie and cut the hem off to make it cooler. She told me my friends from work were nice in a simple way and asked if I really had to go to Jamila's birthday because we needed to save for our goals. If I said no to something, she planned a bigger yes and made it about my lack of ambition. If I said I was tired, she said she was too, and why did her tiredness not count? It's not like I'd never made mistakes. I'd flaked on a cousin's barbecue to take an extra shift. I'd bought a fancy loaf of bread because I wanted to taste something that wasn't cafeteria wheat. I forgot a plant she asked me to water and it wilted. A life is a crooked line. I thought we could straighten ours together. Then the paychecks kept vanishing. The morning after the scissors, I woke early from my shift and found Ava at the table with her laptop and a ledger she'd bought from a craft store. "I made us envelopes," she said, tapping her screen. "You get walking around cash. The rest goes into goals. No more plastic." "Except it's my paycheck," I said, feeling the anger like a tiny bright stone in my pocket. "Except it's our future," she answered, and I swallowed the stone whole. Days blurred into a new routine. She handed me bills like an allowance. She kept my wallet on the top shelf for safekeeping. She had me doing mental math at the checkout line, muttering about which jar to take from. It wasn't about jars. Then came the landlord's slip, and the way she waved it off. A week later, I found a second notice on thicker paper. I folded it and slid it into my back pocket and went to work with the feeling of a door slowly closing somewhere I couldn't see. I told Jamila, who worked in laundry with me and had patience like a saint. She touched my arm with her warm hand and said, "That's not love. It's complicated," I said. "It's not that complicated," she said. "You're scared to lose what you don't actually have." That line sat with me, heavy and true, while the city moved through late winter into a stubborn kind of gray that made everything feel like a waiting room. I waited for a disaster, and it arrived, not with a bang, but with a click. The property manager, Mr. Benitez, called the number on the notice and I picked up. He had a gentle voice that made me like him and resent him at the same time. "Is this Daniel?" he asked. "I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but we need to talk about this unit. I've been giving Ava my part," I said, the words slipping out like I'd been rehearsing. "I understand," he said, "but we don't have record of payments for a while now." My back went hot, then cold. I called he and she names in my head that I wouldn't say out loud. I thanked him for his time, hung up, and stood in the hallway where the light was always a little too yellow. That was when the headline formed, big and bold, like the kind you see on a tabloid in a grocery store line: "Paycheck gone, cards cut." I called the landlord, "Lease in my name." The thought came with a shock of energy so clean I actually smiled. Of course, you don't go from "that's not love" to "lease in my name" overnight. If there's one thing I learned hauling carded sheets and scrubbing out lipstick on pillowcases that look white no matter what you do, it's that some stains don't lift because you scrub harder. You need a different agent. Sunlight. Time. A new strategy. I started small. I went to the bank on my lunch break with my hat pulled low and my jacket zipped. I told them my cards had been destroyed without my permission and asked them to freeze what could be frozen. I moved my direct deposit to a tiny credit union across from the used bookstore on Clark, where the teller called me Hune and passed me a form on heavy paper. I stopped counting the days until the next deposit and started counting the steps to the exit route. At home, I began to gather proof. Screenshots of transfers I hadn't approved. Receipts for rent I had sent her through apps with little notes like "for rent" and "please pay today." Photos of the notices from Mr. Benitez. I took 2 bowls from the cupboard, put my keys and my phone in one, and slid the other in front of me like a scale. Evidence on one side, resolve on the other, Ava noticed. She noticed everything when it came to me. "Why are you being weird?" she asked, toes tucked under her on the couch. "I'm tired," I said, which was true. "Of what?" "Of being managed," I said, and she laughed like I'd told her the sky was bossy. She tightened the reins. She called me at work to ask what time I would be home and reminded me to stop for kale, as if I might overdo it and buy cookies. She went through my phone and then acted wounded when I asked her not to. She put her hand on the back of my neck while I washed dishes and said, "We're doing this together." And I felt like a cow with a rope around its throat. The escalations were small and sharp. She posted a shot of my thrift store coat on her story with a caption about vintage chic and added 3 laughing comments from her friends. She corrected my grammar in a text thread with people I'd just met. She told me my family was solid but messy and suggested we spend the holidays in a cabin with her circle instead. She clipped my wings like my cards. The turning point wasn't dramatic, but it was clear. I came home to find a third notice on thicker paper with stronger words, and a pamphlet about tenant rights that I knew wasn't meant as a weapon but could be one. Ava was on the phone with her cousin, grinning, toes painted a new color that looked like trouble. Stood in the doorway listening to her say, "He's going to thank me one day," and something inside me stood up. Not anger, exactly. Not courage, exactly. More like the simple fact of myself. I texted Jamila, "I think I know what to do." She replied with a heart and an address to a free clinic where people answered questions about housing without making you feel small. I sat in a plastic chair with a number in my hand and a cup of coffee balanced on my knee. I asked what happens if one person on a lease isn't paying and the other person can prove contribution. The woman nodded, asked me patient questions, and slid me a list of words I would need. "You'd be surprised how much landlords like the smell of a responsible tenant," she said, which made me laugh and also breathe a little easier. I called Mr. Benitez from the side street where the wind moved wrappers in a tired swirl. We met in the building's little office that smelled like pine cleaner and paper. I brought a folder with my proof in hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He went through everything slowly, asked a few questions without judgment, and then sat back in his chair with a small sigh. "I don't want to evict anybody," he said. "I want the rent paid and the place respected." "You seem like you do both," I try, I said. If you can bring it current, he continued, and if you still want the apartment, I can transfer the lease. But you need to understand this is going to create a situation. It's already a situation, I said, and for the first time in a while I felt like the adult in the room. We set a date that landed like a bright dot on the horizon. I didn't say the date out loud, I just held it in my mouth like a secret sugar cube. I lined things up. I moved the rest of my pay into the new account. I told a few trusted people what was happening and asked them to be around that afternoon. Not because I expected trouble, but because you never know. At home I was gentle. I cooked. I made the good coffee and let the smell fill the kitchen. I folded laundry, mine and hers, and put it on the bed in soft stacks. I did not tell her what I was doing. There is kindness, and then there is survival. Sometimes those two carry different bags. On the morning it all shifted, the sun actually showed up, pale and honest. Ava left early for a Pilates class and a quick hang with friends on the north side. I knew her route. I knew I had a small window between stretching and gossip. I stood by the window with the old radiator pipes and breathed in and out until the humming in my chest settled. Mr. Benitez arrived with a folder and a sympathetic mouth. The locksmith came up the stairs with a toolbox and a tired smile. Jamila leaned against the wall in the hallway, arms crossed, hair in a scarf, the friend you want in your corner when your life is about to tilt. We sat at the kitchen table where the scissors had flashed, and I signed paper that said I was responsible. We shook hands. The locksmith drilled out the old cylinder, while I stood in the hall and watched the dust curl. It felt both petty and powerful. It felt like choosing air. When the lock clicked into place, it was the cleanest sound I'd heard in months. I turned the key and tucked it into my pocket. The apartment was mine in the only way a place ever is, for as long as you keep your side of the deal and treat it like a promise. Ava came back carrying a tote with fancy letters on it, laugh still on her lips from the sidewalk. She stopped when she saw the locksmith packing up. She took in the faces, did the quick math, and looked at me with a smile that had a serrated edge. "What did you do?" she asked, voice light as frosting. "I put the lease in my name," I said. "I called the landlord. My paycheck is mine. My cards are mine. You need to find somewhere else to stay." For a beat, she was all white space. Then she slid into a performance I'd seen before, ignored me, talked to Mr. Benitez like I was the intern. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said. "No," he said gently. "There hasn't." She tried different doors. Anger, tears, charm. She said I was weak and broke and lucky to have a woman like her shaping me up. She said I'd never keep this place clean. She said I was going to ruin everything. She said she'd forgive me if I reconsidered. In the middle of it, she turned to Jamila and said, "Can you explain to him how the world works?" Which made Jamila laugh so hard she had to sit down. I kept my hand steady and my voice soft, because I know how quickly a story can get written against you. I told her what I had, all the receipts and the screenshots and the notes, not to humiliate, but to be clear. "You cut my cards," I said. "You moved my pay without asking. You didn't pay rent with money I gave you. That's not love." She opened her mouth to argue and then closed it when she saw Mr. Benitez nod. The locksmith handed me a little bag with the old cylinder in it, as if it were a souvenir. I set it on the counter. "I'll give you time to pack," I said. "Take what's yours. I'll be here. If you want a friend with you, call one. If you want me out of the apartment while you pack, say so and I'll step outside. I'm not here to make a mess. But you can't live here." She tried to push past me. I moved, but only enough to make it clear I was staying in the doorway. And she said a few words I won't repeat, and flung a handful of mail in my direction that fluttered to the floor like dying moths. Then she went into the bedroom and started throwing things into a bag with the kind of fury that breaks more than it packs. There's a moment in a storm when the rain can't decide if it wants to be drizzle or downpour. We sat in that, me in the kitchen, Jamila humming under her breath like a lullaby for grown-ups, Mr. Benitez texting someone about a leaky sink in another unit. The hyper-brightness of adrenaline dimmed, and in the quiet I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for: relief. Before she left, Ava stopped at the door and looked at me with a face I had loved. "Do you forgive me?" she asked. The bite gone, a plain, flat question in the middle of the debris. I could have said 1,000 things. I could have replayed every petty moment. Instead, I chose the thing I'd want someone to choose for me if I ever lost the plot. "I forgive you," I said, and the words were heavier than I expected. "But I don't forget, and I'm not going back." She nodded, once. She lifted the bag, turned, and the door shut behind her with a sound that was more sigh than slam. The locksmith cleared his throat and asked me if I wanted extra keys made. I did. I held one out to Jamila like a talisman. "Emergency spare," I said. "Proud of you," she said, and bumped her shoulder against mine. After that day, life didn't become a movie where the music swells and credits roll. It was smaller than that, and better. I learned which cracks in the windows let the good light in. I bought a plant with fat green leaves and kept it alive. I picked up my shifts and brought donuts to the crew on Sundays just because. On a warm morning, I found a sunspot on the kitchen floor and stretched out like a cat to just feel it. The first time I used my new card at the cafe down the block, the barista smiled at the name. "Daniel," she read, and said it like she liked the sound of it. I walked out into the day with a coffee I didn't have to ask permission for, and a roll in my step I hadn't felt in too long. Freedom doesn't always taste like fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet and bitter and exactly the temperature you want. Months later, I got a letter I almost didn't open. It was from Ava. The hand I used to know so well had softened at the edges. She wrote that she was sorry, that she had been scared and controlling and mean, that she had learned some things, that I had been kinder than she deserved. She asked again if I forgave her. I sat at the kitchen table where everything had started and ended and started again. The radiator hissed even though winter had broken. I thought about all of it. The wine-fueled nights, the taped notes on Tupperware, the lick of scissors, the bills folded into my hand like tips, the morning the locksmith drilled out the old lock, and the dust made small curls in the sun. I thought about the man who had walked through all of it and was still standing. I wrote her back. I told her what I'd told her at the door. I forgave. I invited no more drama. I wished her well and meant it. Then I put the letter in the mailbox, tugged on my work coat, and headed out into a city that I finally felt was mine. Some days, when the light hits the hallway just right, I catch a whisper of the old scene and feel the shock all over again. The difference now is what follows. Not panic, not fury, just a steady voice in my head that says you did what you had to do. You put your name on the things that mattered. You took your life back without becoming someone you wouldn't recognize. There's a kind of justice that's loud and messy and throws plates. And there's the other kind. The kind where you gather your papers and your nerve, you sit at a table, you sign your name, and you change the locks. The kind where you walk out of a bank with a new card and a new account and a smile that doesn't need an audience. The kind where you answer the knock on your door and it's not danger, it's the neighbor asking if you've got sugar to spare. I keep sugar now, I keep coffee, I keep my own keys. Sometimes I even play a little music, strumming on a secondhand guitar I found at a shop near the river. Strings a touch too high, sound a little raw. It doesn't matter. It fills the room with something like forgiveness, and the plants seem to like it. If someone asked me what the moral is, I'd say this. Love isn't management. Partnership isn't power. If you ever find yourself being handled like a problem, you're allowed to become your own solution. You're allowed to call the landlord. You're allowed to put your name on the line and mean it. You're allowed to tell someone, calmly and clearly, that they don't get to control you ever again. And if you're the one who needs to ask, you're allowed to say, "I'm sorry." You're allowed to make amends and let the past be the past. Forgiveness is a form of freedom too, and it moves in both directions when we let it. Sometimes late in the day, I'll lean against the kitchen sink and watch the city through the wavy old glass. I can hear the hum of radios, the soft thud of feet on stairs, the hiss of the radiator that never quite quiets. I think about that first snip of plastic and how small and huge it felt. I think about the sound of a new lock clicking into place. I think about the line between then and now and the way it runs right through my name on a simple piece of paper pinned to the corkboard by the door. Daniel Reyes, apartment 2, rent due on the 1st. The kind of hard fact that can feel like a blessing when it's yours. I hold that ordinary miracle in my pocket like a coin I won without gambling. I go to work, I come home, I make eggs with pepper the way I like, and when the radiator hisses, I hear it saying the same thing I learned the hard way. Keep what's yours safe. Treat what isn't yours with care, and if someone tries to cut your life into pieces, remember you know how to put a contract in your own name.
Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in the next one.